Thank you for that lovely welcome. And thank you for being here today. I'm thrilled to be here this morning. I'm here to talk about risk this morning. And to start, I thought I would introduce you to some of the people that I find to be kind of the embodiment of risk. And that is random kids on the internet laying total waste to their parents' homes. So I've been on this contemporary art bender the last few months, and I have to say, this guy here in the green shirt, what he's done with the Sharpie crosshatch, taking it down from the wall over to the toilet seat and then onto the canvas of his own body it's quite radical. Same with this lady here who has bathed herself in white paint in what looks like some kind of avant-garde political statement. I'm kind of joking, but also not. We're going to come back to these kids, but right now I just want you to remember the look on their faces. This guy is happy, he's proud of what he's done, he's totally unself-conscious, and she's defiant. She's like, deal with the fact that I am tracking paint all over your house. Briefly, I'm going to talk about the risk that I'm most known for. It doesn't involve Sharpies or paint, unfortunately, but it does involve a mess, and that mess is me. Circa 2010 to 2013. I know no one in this room is familiar with that cliche of post-college graduation, what on earth am I doing with my life, meltdown. But I took that theme and I really ran with it. I graduated college at the height of the economic crisis, and then I developed this clinical anxiety disorder. I had some pretty serious health issues. I had to quit my management job, move back in with my parents for a little while. It sounds kind of hyperbolic to say it now, but at the time, it really felt like my life was over in some ways. And so I tried everything I could to get my life, quote, back on track. I think I checked out every self-help book from Book People, tried deep breathing, meditation, Zen Buddhism, and some of those things helped, but ultimately, none of them were the cure, the fix. So after about 2 years of this, I gave up. I just decided that there was nothing I could do. There was a moment when I sat in my office. I was living in Austin at the time, and I had this part-time filing job. I sat at that desk, and I said, you know what? This is just how my life is now. I'm anxious, and I have this unglamorous existence, and that's it. And I let go of all of my big life plans at a really profound level. And then something funny happened at that point, which was I actually started to feel better. It took a few months, but by the end of 2012, this is after about 2.5 years of barely functioning, I started to feel better. I felt more alive, the anxiety was diminishing, and my health recovered. So I can't express enough how much of a surprise this was. I was in total shock that I was kind of had returned to the world. And so at that point, I'm like, okay, now what? Now what do I do? And so I did, as one does, I joined an online dating site. So this is me, 2013, April. I joined OkCupid, and within 10 minutes of creating my account, I found this weird-looking guy here. And me and Weird Guy, we really hit it off big time. On our first date, he told me that he did not have a home and was illegally squatting in his university office to prepare for his experiment in an alternative living situation, which I later discovered was a used dumpster. So for whatever reason, meeting this guy who had aspirations to live in a used dumpster, it was exactly what I wanted at that point in my life. And so we had this whirlwind romance. A few weeks later, we progressed to the next stage of our relationship, also as one does. And we jumped on a plane to Istanbul, Turkey, with nothing but what we were wearing. I had this little purse, but other than that, that was it. All we had was a return ticket out of London 3 weeks later, and that was the idea. So We decided to call it a travel experiment, partly because that was less scary to my parents at that point, but also partly because that's really how we were thinking about it. It was two people who hardly knew each other. We were going to drop into this unfamiliar situation with a couple of rules. No plans, so it was totally spontaneous from start to finish. No hotels. We had to stay with locals, and we couldn't plan in advance, who those people were going to be. And then the big one was no stuff. It's kind of like a more romantic version of Survivor. That's kind of how I think of it. And this was really risky, right? Taking off with this weird guy was risky that I didn't really know. I just recovered and had this newfound mental stability. That was risky. And then going with no stuff, that was, in my mind, very risky. Also, I had quit my job and, cashed in most of my checking account for these flights to Istanbul and London. So collectively, this makes about as much sense as drawing on your face with the extra bold Sharpie. But I felt compelled to do it. I just knew I needed to, and so I did. And did not have an anxiety attack. We did not kill each other. We actually had, the adventure of a lifetime. So that's pictures of us in our one outfit in all these different places. We made it through 8 countries in 21 days, and it was really amazing. The adventure did not stop after this trip. We got back, and as you heard in my intro, I wrote up this story about 6 months later, and on a whim, it was the first thing I had ever written and submitted, and it was accepted by Salon.com, and then my life changed overnight when it went viral on their front page. So we were on TV. That's us on The View, which was a very strange day. And I had agents calling me saying, do you think you can turn this into a book? So I found myself 3 months after that in the position of sitting down, weird guy, and saying, honey, I'm about to write this revealing memoir about our brand new relationship. So that was an interesting conversation to have. And again, this was not premeditated. This was a total shock, all of this happening. I have always wanted to be a writer, but I figured I was going to have to pay my dues pitching, maybe get an MFA. I didn't think I was going to get it by wearing the same clothes for 21 days straight. But here we are. Here's the book, No Baggage. It's been translated into 15 languages, and the New Line Cinema has developed it into a screenplay. So not bad for a hot mess, right? Pretty good. And so when I tell this story, the question that I always get is, how did you do this? How did you pull this off? And how did you do it organically, just unfolded? And I've had a lot of time to think about it. And I've realized that a lot of it boils down to risk-taking. So just really quickly, I want to share some of what I learned about risk in the hopes that you can apply it to your creative path as well. And so to start with, I just want to point out that when we talk about risk, what we're usually saying is, I'm about to try something, and there's a pretty good chance that it's not going to work. We also talk about the outcomes of taking a risk, usually in a binary, so bad or good. You spin the roulette wheel. You either win the chips or you lose them, or you launch a project and it's either a success or a failure. But what I learned by taking a complete nosedive was that I want to move away from that binary perspective on risk. And so now I think of taking a risk as an experiment. And there's lots of different outcomes that you can get from that experiment. And whatever outcome you get, you learn something. There's wisdom, there's knowledge, there's life experience. So like jumping on a plane with this guy, maybe we fall in love and we're still together 3 years later, or maybe we discover we can't stand the sight or the smell of each other. And I go on my own, and I learn something about myself that way. And that's where I really like these messy kids at the beginning. They're so inspiring. Like, babies are willing to test anything. They try, they take risks, and they don't think of it as, I'm failing or I'm not failing. They're just testing outcomes until they find something that works. It's very functional. And scientists are the same way, right? You have a hypothesis, and you're testing it through an experiment. And whether the results that you get are confirming your hypothesis or saying no, maybe not, either way, that information is valuable, and it deepens the body of research that you have. Which brings me to another point about experimentation. And that is, it's really trendy right now to talk about purpose and finding your passion and living this purposeful life. And I believe in that. I am big on seeking meaning, but I have found the importance in carving out space for things that don't necessarily have a clear purpose or an obvious logic. I think most of the success that I have experienced has come from totally bizarre whims, right? Like hitchhiking through the Balkans with no stuff just to see what happens. That was literally the only motivation. Or with the weird guy, let's turn a dumpster into a home and just see what happens. And it doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's a motif in history too, right? Like we've got major scientific and medical breakthroughs that are accidents, or they're discovered through some completely unrelated process. And so, I really encourage you to think about experimentation and carving out space for accidents and coincidence and chaos. And then we have risk as discomfort. So even if you manage to think about your life as this experiment and you're comfortable trying different things, chances are when you go for that risk, it's not going to be comfortable, especially at first. The unknown is scary, right? And as humans, we're hardwired to want to predict and control. And it doesn't help that society is... our society, at least, is not real comfortable with the darkness and the uncertainty. We're not taught how to navigate that very well. I was just in Mexico City this week, and my sister and I drove through this neighborhood called Tepito. And it's one of the largest and supposedly roughest black markets in Latin America. And it was total chaos. It was fascinating. But what it's also known for is the shrine to Santa Muerte, which is the saint of death, this female folk saint. She's a skeleton in a long robe. And that's something that I really appreciated about the Mexican culture. They are not afraid of having death right there out in the open, right? There's skeletons, there's skulls, there's wall murals. And it's bright and beautiful and elaborate, and it's just right out there in communal spaces. And we don't have that as much here. And so I think, especially if you're trying to create something powerful with a lot of impact, you have to be willing to lean into that discomfort. I mentioned that during the music too. Like, go towards those dark places and be curious about what's in the shadows, because those dark places are ultimately the sources of a lot of real and compelling human expression. And if I hadn't learned how to kind of settle into that discomfort and get to know it, there's no way I would have said yes to that invitation to get on a plane with no stuff and just take off, right? And my career would not have launched the way that it did. We also have risk as vulnerability. Vulnerability, it's been said in so many different ways that if you really want to create something big, you have to be willing to deviate from the mean, right? You have to be able to put yourself out there. So I think of vulnerability as similar to discomfort, but where it's different is that vulnerability, I think of it's more of an act of service. You're offering some part of yourself, you're exposing some part of yourself, and that's really powerful. I know that I've struck on a good idea when I do not want to do it, when I'm afraid of it. And but within that fear, there's also this compulsion. It's like some kind of creative force that's bigger than my individual ego. And so that's something I encourage you to think about too. Whatever that thing is that is scary, or that leap off the cliff, that's also the thing that you have to give. That's the thing that you have to offer. Even standing up here in front of you this morning right now, talking about that one time that I, totally fell apart for several years. It's a risk, and I'm being vulnerable in front of you. It's not a smart career move, you could imagine, but it's very powerful. I've given this talk in various forms a lot the last few months, and it's amazing how people come forward afterwards and say, I have experienced something very similar, and it opens up the space for other people to connect, and that's really valuable. So finally, I have a risk questionnaire. It's very short, and it's to help you decide whether you should go for that thing that's keeping you up at night, that terrifying, beautiful thing. And the first question is, am I going to die? And this question I'm kind of poking fun a little bit, but I also want to acknowledge that when we're talking about risk, I think for most people in this room, risk is relative, right? If you're sitting here this morning, you're probably not struggling with basic Maslow's needs like food and water, shelter, bodily security. When we talk about, for us taking a creative risk, you're not literally like going to die. You're not literally in harm's way. I think that's important to acknowledge, and also to tell yourself, the worst that could happen is I might feel disappointed or depressed for a while, or I might feel lost, like I don't know which way to go. But you're probably not going to die by going for it. The second one is will people suffer? Is your risk-taking behavior going to negatively affect other people? If so, you might want to reconsider or tread very carefully. And then finally, is my ego the only thing stopping me? And if you say yes to this, then I will direct you back to our original protagonist here, and just say, these kids do not have an ego about what they've just created, this awesome mess. I think that's really inspiring. So take the risk. Yeah. Thank you.